This kiss was supposed to be easy. That's what everyone thought. A quiet beach. Early morning light. The ocean calm enough to cooperate. Cameras already rolling. Crew members standing still, watching two of the most famous people in America walk toward each other as if nothing in the world could go wrong. Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz had done this 100 times before. Smiles, timing, chemistry so natural it looked effortless. This scene wasn't meant to be remembered. It was meant to pass quietly. Just another romantic moment captured and forgotten. But it didn't. Because just seconds before the kiss, Lucille stopped. Not dramatically, not loudly. She simply stopped. Desi was only a few steps away when he realized something was wrong. The rhythm they always shared, the invisible count that guided their movements, broke. Lucille didn't lean in. She didn't laugh it off. She didn't adjust her mark. She stood there, still as the sand beneath her feet, staring at Desi as if she were seeing him for the first time, or the last. Then she said it, quiet enough that the microphones barely caught it, clear enough that Desi heard every word. "I can't." For a moment, no one reacted. The waves kept rolling in. The wind moved her dress. The camera kept turning. Everyone assumed it was a mistake, a missed cue, something that would be corrected in the next take. But Lucille didn't move. Desi lowered his hand slowly, confusion spreading across his face. This wasn't acting. This wasn't a choice made for the camera. Something real had just surfaced, something neither of them had rehearsed, something no script had prepared them for. The director called cut, but the word felt late. The moment had already escaped control. Lucille turned away, not from the crew, but from Desi. Her face was composed, but her eyes weren't. They carried a weight that didn't belong in a romantic scene, a heaviness that didn't belong on a beach meant to look carefree and warm. People who had worked with her for years recognized it instantly. This wasn't nerves. This wasn't defiance. This was restraint. Desi took a step closer, lowering his voice, asking if she was all right. Lucille didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, it wasn't for the cameras. It was for him alone. And whatever she said next changed the direction of the day, and the meaning of the scene forever. What the audience would eventually see looked subtle, almost ordinary. But what happened in that pause? What happened in the seconds after Lucille refused to kiss the man she loved on screen? That was something the cameras weren't supposed to catch. And yet, somehow, they did. That refusal didn't just stop a scene, that it threatened everything around it. Because at that moment in time, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz weren't just co-stars standing on a beach. They were a carefully balanced image, America's favorite couple, both on screen and off. Studios sold their chemistry as effortless joy, a marriage that worked because it looked perfect under bright lights. Audiences believed it. Executives depended on it. And any crack in that illusion was considered dangerous. Especially now. Lucille's career had reached a fragile peak. She was respected, trusted, profitable, but only as long as she stayed predictable. Desi carried his own pressure. As a producer and performer, he wasn't just acting in scenes like this. He was responsible for keeping the machine running smoothly. One uncomfortable delay, one whispered rumor, one unexplained refusal, and the wrong people would start asking questions neither of them wanted to answer. This beach scene mattered more than anyone admitted. On paper, it was simple. A kiss. A reminder of connection. Something warm and reassuring that audiences would read as love. But behind the cameras, it carried another purpose. Proof that everything between them was still solid, still sellable, still safe. If Lucille refused that kiss, it didn't just look like a creative choice. It looked like resistance, distance, something breaking. And in Hollywood, distance was dangerous. Because when a woman like Lucille Ball said no in front of a full crew, people didn't ask why. They asked what's wrong. They speculated. They filled silence with stories. And stories could travel faster than truth. A single moment could turn into headlines, pressure from a studio, meetings behind closed doors where decisions were made without the people most affected in the room. Desi understood that immediately. He wasn't angry. He wasn't embarrassed. He was alarmed. Because whatever had stopped Lucille wasn't small. And whatever it was, it had the power to follow them long after the cameras stopped rolling. This wasn't about romance anymore. It was about control. about reputation, about whether they were still allowed to decide how much of themselves the world was entitled to see. Lucille knew that too. That's why she didn't explain herself right away. She stood there, holding the weight of what she'd just done, knowing that once a line like that was crossed, there was no pretending it hadn't happened. The kiss could be removed, the scene could be rewritten, but the tension, the truth beneath it, was already exposed. And somewhere between the crashing waves and the silent crew, both of them understood the same thing at the same time. If this moment was handled the wrong way, it wouldn't just ruin a scene, it would change how people looked at them forever. Looking back, the signs were there long before Lucille stopped on that beach. They were just easy to ignore. That morning had begun like any other. The call time was early, the air still cool before the sun climbed high enough to turn the sand into heat. Crew members moved efficiently, setting marks, checking light, doing the same routines they'd done 1,000 times before. From a distance, it looked calm, professional, controlled. Lucille arrived on set composed, as always. Hair perfectly set, wardrobe pressed and ready. She greeted people politely, smiled when expected, answered questions with practiced ease. To anyone who didn't know her well, nothing seemed out of place. But Desi noticed. He noticed the way her smile faded the second she thought no one was watching. The way she kept her hands clasped together instead of gesturing the way she usually did. The way she avoided standing too close to him while they waited, leaving just a little more space than usual. Not enough to draw attention, but enough to feel unfamiliar. They had shared thousands of moments like this before. Sets, stages, quiet corners between takes. Lucille had always been steady there, focused, in control. That morning, something was different. When the director went over the scene, Lucille listened carefully, but didn't ask questions. She didn't joke. She didn't rehearse the movement the way she usually would. She nodded, once slowly, as if committing something to memory she already understood too well. Desi tried to catch her eye. When he did, she looked away almost immediately. It wasn't fear, it wasn't nerves, it was resolve. The kind that comes after a decision has already been made. The kind that doesn't need rehearsal. And that unsettled him more than any argument ever had. Because Lucille was a professional. If she was going to disrupt a scene like this, she wouldn't do it impulsively. She would do it because, in her mind, there was no other option. As the crew prepared to roll, Desi stepped closer and asked her quietly if she was okay. Lucille answered the same way she always did when she didn't want to explain something yet. "I'm fine." But her voice didn't match the words. The ocean moved steadily behind them. The light was perfect. Everything was ready. From the outside, this looked like just another day on set. But inside that small space between them, something unspoken was building. Something that would surface the moment the camera started rolling. And when it did, it wouldn't come out as a mistake. It would come out as a refusal. When the cameras finally rolled, everything moved the way it always had. Desi walked toward Lucille at an easy pace, relaxed, familiar, hitting his marks without thinking. This was muscle memory for him. Years of performing together had taught them how to move as one. The scene called for warmth, for closeness, for a kiss that felt natural enough to disappear into the story. At first, it seemed like that's exactly where it was going. Lucille stood facing him, the ocean behind her, her posture calm, her expression carefully neutral. As Desi closed the distance between them, the world narrowed the way it always does when a scene settles into place. The crew watched. The sound of the waves filled the silence. No one expected anything unusual. Then Desi reached out. It was a small movement, instinctive, unplanned. His hand lifted the way it had 100 times before. But Lucille reacted immediately. She stepped back, sharp and decisive, as if the space between them had suddenly become something she needed to protect. Desi froze. This wasn't timing. This wasn't improvisation. The shift was too real, too immediate. For a brief moment, he wasn't a performer reacting in character. He was a husband trying to understand why the woman in front of him had just pulled away. "I can't," Lucille said again, louder this time. The words landed hard. Someone called out to cut, but no one moved right away. The air felt heavier, charged with something that didn't belong in a scripted moment. Lucille's composure cracked just enough for the truth to show through. Her eyes weren't distant now. They were focused, steady, filled with something that had been held back for a long time. Desi lowered his hand slowly. He didn't ask why, not yet. Lucille turned slightly, angling her body away from him, as if to shield herself from the attention she knew was coming. Around them, the crew avoided eye contact, pretending to adjust equipment that didn't need adjusting, giving them space without being told to. This was an embarrassment that it wasn't conflict, that it was restraint, deliberate and unwavering. The director stepped forward, confused but cautious, asking if Lucille needed a moment. She nodded once, but she didn't step away. She stayed right there, grounded, as if leaving would only make things worse. Desi finally spoke, quietly enough that only she could hear. "What's going on?" Lucille didn't answer immediately. She took a breath, slow, measured, the kind of breath someone takes when they're about to say something they can't take back. And in that pause, Desi understood something important. Whatever she was about to tell him had nothing to do with the scene. Lucille didn't look at the crew when she finally spoke. She looked only at Desi. Her voice was steady, but it carried weight, the kind that comes from holding something in for too long. She told him this wasn't about the kiss itself. It was about what that kiss would mean once it was frozen on film, replayed, slowed down, studied by people who believed they were entitled to every private detail of their lives. She said there were moments a person could act through, and moments that demanded honesty instead. This was one of them. She explained that lately, pretending had started to feel heavier than telling the truth. That the camera didn't just capture images, it captured tension, distance, unspoken questions. And right now, she couldn't bring herself to fake closeness when the space between them was real, unresolved, and painfully present. Not on a beach. Not in front of strangers. Not when the audience would believe it meant something it didn't. Desi listened without interrupting. His expression didn't change, but something in him settled. He understood what she was protecting. Not just herself, but the line between performance and reality. Once that line disappeared, it never came back. And Lucille wasn't willing to cross it. Not even for a scene that everyone else thought was harmless. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The ocean filled the silence again, steady and indifferent. Desi glanced briefly toward the crew, then back at Lucille. He could see the decision already made in her eyes. This wasn't fear. This was clarity. "Okay," he said quietly. Just one word. No argument. No pressure. No attempt to fix it in a way that would force her hand. He didn't ask her to explain further. He didn't try to convince her to push through. Instead, he did something unexpected. He chose her boundary over the scene. Desi turned toward the director and told him they didn't need the kiss. That the moment could work without it. That the distance, the hesitation, the unfinished feeling, all of it said more than any physical gesture ever could. He framed it as a creative choice, something that added depth rather than removed it. But Lucille knew the truth. That choice wasn't about storytelling. It was about respect. The tension on set shifted. What had felt fragile moments earlier now felt deliberate, controlled. The scene wasn't broken anymore. It was changing. And in that quiet adjustment, something else changed too. The cameras would still roll. The audience would still watch. They just wouldn't be seeing what they expected. They would be seeing something real. When they reset the scene, nothing about it looked dramatic on the surface. No raised voices. No announcements. No explanation given to the crew beyond a simple adjustment. The marks were shifted slightly. The movement simplified. The kiss quietly removed, as if it had never been there to begin with. To anyone watching from a distance, it looked like an ordinary creative change, the kind that happened on sets every day. But for the people standing inside that moment, everything felt different. When the camera rolled again, Desi walked toward Lucille just as before. Same pace, same path. But this time, there was hesitation in his step, intentional, controlled. When he reached her, he didn't touch her. He didn't reach out. He simply stopped, close enough that the space between them felt heavy instead of empty. Lucille met his eyes, and the camera caught it. Not romance, not performance, recognition. There was longing there, but also restraint. Something unfinished. Something held back on purpose. Desi started to speak, then stopped, as if realizing there were things he couldn't say without making them true. Lucille's expression softened, not into a smile, but into acceptance. The kind that comes when two people understand each other without needing agreement. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. That pause did more than the kiss ever could have. When Desi finally turned away, the movement was slow, deliberate, almost reluctant. He walked past her, leaving the moment behind without resolving it. Lucille stayed where she was, watching him go. Her face composed but unmistakably changed. The camera lingered, just long enough to let the audience feel the absence. Cut. No one spoke right away. The director didn't rush in. The crew didn't break position. There was a shared sense that something rare had just happened, something unplanned, unscripted, and strangely perfect. What they had captured wasn't a romantic beat. It was tension, distance, truth. They ran it again, and again. Each take carried the same quiet weight, the same restraint. Nothing extra, nothing forced. By the final take, no one was asking for the kiss back. No one mentioned what had been removed. The scene worked, not in spite of the change, but because of it. What the cameras recorded that day wasn't a refusal. It was a choice, and it showed up in every frame. When the scene was finally wrapped, it didn't end with applause or relief. The crew moved on quietly, almost respectfully, as if everyone sensed they'd witnessed something that didn't belong to them. Lucille stepped away without saying much, her composure back in place, the boundaries she'd drawn now firmly held. Desi watched her go, not with regret, but with understanding. The moment had passed, not erased, not fixed, simply honored. In the final cut, audiences never noticed what was missing. They praised the scene for its depth, for its maturity, for the way it lingered in the chest instead of fading away. Critics talked about the subtle tension, the restraint, the emotional intelligence of two performers who didn't rely on obvious gestures to make something meaningful. They called it real. They called it powerful. They were right, just not for the reasons they thought. What no one knew was that the strength of that moment didn't come from technique or direction. It came from a decision made in silence, from one person refusing to perform a feeling she wasn't ready to give away, and another choosing to protect that refusal instead of challenging it. That choice didn't make headlines, that IT didn't become trivia, that IT lived quietly inside the work itself. And that's why it lasted. Because sometimes the most unforgettable moments on screen aren't created by what people do, but by what they choose not to do when it matters most. Moments where respect outweighs expectation, where honesty takes precedence over perfection. Long after the beach was cleared and the equipment packed away, that scene continued to speak, not loudly, not obviously, but truthfully. It reminded anyone paying attention that real connection doesn't come from forcing closeness. It comes from recognizing limits and honoring them without question. And that's what the cameras really caught that day. Not a refusal, but a rare act of understanding, preserved forever in silence.